Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our Future Tech podcast series. It's me, Charlie Sell, the Group MD of Arrows Group, where I speak to thought leaders, senior people within the technology space, asking them about their career, topics that are really relevant to them and obviously to our STEM listeners that will hopefully resonate. And we always finish on those all important one or two pieces of career advice. And we're in our fourth series now, so it really has built some momentum. And happy to say we've just broken the 5,000 Spotify subscribers. So thank you to everyone who is now a regular listener to these podcasts. And we hope to continue the journey. And so really pleased to have Tom Gilbert with me today. Tom is the head of cloud and middleware at Barclays. Everyone knows Barclays, I'm sure. So, and Tom works for the actual group, the global part of the business. So, yeah, what he's seen and does is going to be pretty interesting, and keen to find out more about the world of cloud and middleware, but equally about the intersection of what Tom and his team does, not only with technology, but also the people aspects. And anyone watching a video will see the banners behind him as well, that there's quite a lot of things that Tom is really passionate about that we'll hopefully cover. So Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Yes, and we were just talking beforehand, weren't we, that the world is slowly getting back to normal, but we're looking forward to the world getting back to normal. But Barclays have been, and you specifically, have been really involved in thinking about people and the well-being and welfare of your teams. So let's start first with jumping into finding a bit about your story, and we'll get into thinking about all of those wonderful topics. So yeah, tell us a bit about your story.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I think like many people of a certain age, I took an unusual journey into technology, kind of some kind of chance and luck involved, I think, and these things always can depend on the roll of the dice. I went to university at Bath. I got a chemistry degree, and I did a chemistry degree with a year in industry. And in that year out, I was working as a research chemist. I was doing science, so you would have seen me in a lab coat. And not spending an awful lot of time at work in front of a computer. Now, in my spare time, as a little bit of a technology geek, I guess you could have said back then, I was teaching myself programming for fun, and once I graduated, I did my first job was actually, again, it was in science, but I found myself spending a lot more time in the computer room than the lab, and because back then I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I think I'm always very impressed by people who do at that age know what they want to do with their lives. So I spent a lot of time in the computer lab. I went home and programmed, and I got involved in open source. So I started contributing to a number of open source projects. Now, bearing in mind this was 1999, that was projects like the Apache web server, which some people might have heard of, but these days it kind of runs the internet. But back then it was kind of unusual to have free software. Open source software was kind of a new thing. So I got into Linux, I got into open source software, but I was doing it all in my spare time. Anyway, one day I got a very strange call from someone offering me a job in London doing IT. And I have to say, I wasn't quite sure what to do with that. That somebody wanted to pay me to do my hobby. Actually, my boss at the time in the lab, who probably one of the best bosses I ever had, said, "Why on earth are you thinking about it? Go." So I did. So I went and joined a startup in London, doing Linux consultancy back when A, Linux was new, and B, Startups were thriving and flourishing. And I suddenly started a career in technology. That was a very interesting journey, working for a small company, startup. There were 12 of us at peak, so I sat next to the CFO and the chief salesman, and I was the IT guy. Then I think one thing led to another, and the startup boom crashed in about the year 2000s. And it went back down to just two of us, me and the CEO, working out of his garage, closing up the business. So through my network of open source developers that I knew kind of globally, I got introduced to another consultancy who put me into Deutsche Bank. And they sent me into Deutsche Bank to fix a broken web server on a 3-month contract that ended up being an 18-month contract, extended, because I fixed the web server quite well, and I built them a web platform. And so they kept me on for a while, and then offered me a full-time job. So sort of accidentally, I ended up working in finance IT. And I went from fixing broken web servers to building global web and application hosting platforms. I joined Deutsche permanently as what would have been at the time assistant vice president, but it was a team of graduates. It was a very exciting period of my career, one of the most diverse teams I've ever worked in. And it was this kind of bureaucratic old bank, and we were the cool kids in the corner doing open source, and it was a real exciting journey. Anyway, long story short, I spent 18 years of my career there at Deutsche. So I went from being on part of the team to leading a team to leading teams. And I went from kind of assistant vice president, director, and actually all the way to MD, staying technical, which is the only way I would have ever wanted to do it personally. And then a couple of years ago, the opportunity came up to move to Barclays. And at Barclays, my role is cloud and middleware. So still highly in the technology, but now I'm also working for a company where I have much more of an identity with the customer. I feel a connection to the customer because personally I've had a bank account with Barclays since I was about 8.
Yeah,
I had a super savers account when I was a kid, so much more connection to the customer perhaps than I did at Deutsche Bank. And now I run a global team of about 400 technologists, covering public cloud, private cloud, and a whole bunch of kind of shared IT platforms and services on which most of the bank runs. And so I find myself today kind of responsible for over 100,000 virtual machines and containers that run the bank, and every time I say that number, I'm still surprised by it. But that's kind of my journey, career-wise, up to this point.
Yeah, wow, and thank you for that, because what a journey. And I guess notes I was taking down through that, and probably one of my first questions, because you went from, as you said, this being a hobby to going to a startup to then getting into an established business like Deutsche Bank, for example. And do you think that's still a possible route for graduates today versus many graduates thinking they have to go through the sort of the formal graduate schemes? Is it still open to people from all sorts of different types of experience?
I would say more than ever. It is more than ever. Back then, it was quite unusual in banking. There was this sort of inner circle of people that were like finance people.
Yeah.
Right? And I felt at times as a bit of a usurper, right? Which is, I'm not a finance guy, right? I don't belong here. I just know computers. Well, guess what, right? Every finance organization these days is a technology company first. And finance, it's obviously it's the core business, but the technology makes it all, right? So I would say that the other thing that has changed significantly, but was even true then for me, is that your degree gets you your first role. I think. Maybe, I mean, actually, in my case, weirdly, yeah, not in technology, but and then the rest is up to you, and it's a learning journey. And companies like Barclays are highly cognizant that we can't just reach out and say we need someone with 10 years of cloud experience, right? Because people haven't been doing cloud in banking for 10 years. Those people don't exist. So we know that what we're looking for is actually passion, a willingness to learn, agility, and diversity. And I think fundamentally, my job these days is to create diverse, motivated teams and give them the tools and training they need to make the bank successful. And you won't see many job specs from me demanding 15 years experience with Python or something like that, because quite frankly, on the graduate scheme or off it, we will teach you.
Yeah. Well, and that is brilliant for people to know, because I think we held a webinar recently where we had STEM graduates on there, and many of them were having those common frustrations where they were applying on these never-ending sort of graduate applications, which were hours and hours, pages and pages, and they didn't get any feedback whether they were successful, only if they were successful or not successful, without any real learning of, well, what can we do to improve? So to know that what you look for specifically is passion, willingness to learn, agility, and diversity, that should give people hope, really, in the fact that, yeah, the degree will get you a foot in the door per se, but actually it's down to all of you and our listeners to think about how they can grow their careers once they get that opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, and if I can give, I know we'll do some tips at the end, but if I can give a tip right now, is some people do advertise jobs with a laundry wish list of skills and experience that they would like to have. And I call it unicorn hunting, because there is no unicorn that has all of those things. And a lot of people would look at a job spec like that and be put off from applying at all. Whereas our graduate scheme, we say you don't need any experience, we'll train you. For any other role outside of the graduate scheme, there'll probably be a list of stuff.
Yeah.
And my advice is to look at what the job is, look at if it's the kind of thing that you want to do, and learn the rest, because we don't get as many applicants as we would like, because we're putting people off with, I think, an extensive laundry list of requirements, and see past that, I think, and look and think about whether you're the kind of person that could pick that stuff up.
Yeah, and that is a brilliant tip, because it's actually one thing that we do a lot of work with, and we'll cover this, I'm sure, in our conversation, is when people look at this list, there is still this statistic that men will look at a laundry list and say, well, I fit 50% of that, so I will give it a try. Whereas there's still a culture that females will look at the list and say, well, I'm less than 80% of that, so I won't apply. And this is what creates this real problem in the sort of the experience layer, whereas the graduates are more open, aren't they? And that's what we want to really foster and harness, rather than put people off.
Yeah, well, I mean, I say, look at me, right? I have no formal education in IT. Almost everything is self-taught or accumulated experience over time. And to be honest, there'll be moments in your career where you might have a bit of imposter syndrome, because you think, how on earth did I get here? And when will they notice that I shouldn't be? But then you look back and you think, no, well, of course I could do that. And what you, more and more, you can't really, you have to just keep up. Like, learning is a continual thing. If you joined the bank 10 years ago as a Python programmer, good luck if you want to be still doing that now, because you've just got to keep learning. what we love about our graduates is that they just come in with that expectation. I'm learning from day one, and it doesn't stop. And actually, I think more of us could learn from that energy.
Yeah. Again, I couldn't agree with you more. So let's talk more about then the intersection. We were talking about this a bit before the podcast about what really resonates and what you're personally passionate about. And we were discussing that there's this real intersection between technology and people and stuff that you're doing personally. With 400 people, report in your group team. I guess this must be super prevalent in your mind's eye. So talk a bit about that. How do you really focus on engaging the sort of the technology and people aspects of your global teams?
Well, part of it is the day job. I mean, in some respects, what we had to do. If you look at what we're doing right now, okay, either of us could be anywhere in the world right now, and well, actually, almost anywhere. I think once we start getting into the realities of satellite internet and things like that, it literally could be anywhere in the world. Because all you really need is that equity of connectivity, and then you can contribute, right? So one of the massive things that we've been doing, especially over the last 18 months with the pandemic, is of course pivoted our entire organization to working like this.
Yeah.
And that's not just our office staff, back office, IT guys, right, and gals. Like, I can program from anywhere, right? Laptop in a Starbucks, no worries. But it's our contact centers, it's our traders. If you think about the tools and the technology that we have available to us today, and this is where I'm going to bring in the cloud word. I can't imagine us being able to do that 3 or 4 years ago. And actually, as public cloud in particular, helped us swing all of our contact centers to working from home using voice over IP technology and tools that are brand new capabilities. And we swung 80,000 people in 3 weeks into that way of working. And it's just such what an accomplishment if you think about it. If a year ago, if we'd started talking about could we have more people working from home, 5%, 10%, not 100%. So that's one thing. So obviously the tools and the technology, and actually my team are big contributors to making the bank work in a way that doesn't involve, at the moment, a lot of physical activity. I think one of the challenges with that is that what you miss out on, and one of the great things about a large organization, is networking and opportunity. And if you think about my career path, I had a couple of sort of probably lucky breaks, but those, they wouldn't have come up if I didn't have those networks and those opportunities to get lucky with, right? So the right time, the right person, the right circle. And I think one of the big things that we are really trying to do at the moment is find ways for people to stay connected while we're disparate. Yeah. And one of the nice things about, so in Radbrook at Barclays, we have a campus site with almost 5,000 people working there. So for me to bump into someone who's not in technology, who's in the retail bank, or in finance or risk or legal or treasury at the coffee shop, and start to build that network and that social kind of non-work interaction, some of that's gone away, and we've had to work really hard to create opportunities for people to do that virtually. And you have to do that. It's really important to invest in your network, because if you're just joining the WebEx, Zoom, Teams calls with the same people every week, then your bubble isn't growing, right? Your influence isn't growing. So we've had to really work on that. And then I think the other aspect is bringing yourself to work. And the banner behind me, obviously, we've just come out of Pride Month. I've done a number of events with. I did a panel event last week with a number of our recent graduates on their experiences of joining a large organization remotely. And one of the biggest challenges is, how do you have that conversation about who you are and who you like, when there's a bit less opportunity for small talk and banter? And we really had to remind the listeners to kind of give those opportunities to people, and to ask open questions, and to let people be themselves at work, because it's very easy when the WebEx clicks on, or the Zoom call clicks on, straight into shop and straight into shop talk. So I'm very interested in that kind of collaborative aspect of how we bring people together remotely, even when there's no pandemic. We are in, we're in 40 countries around the world. So it's not like we can all meet each other every day. So this kind of, we have to use these tools well. We have to work proactively ourselves on building and maintaining our networks and getting outside of our bubbles every day.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant point. And I know, to be quite frank, I think you're quite ahead of so many other sort of leaders, not just within the finance world, but in many industry sectors. Because one thing I'm seeing, and I predict that there's going to be quite a cosmic shift in people looking to leave companies or join companies for no other reason than they've forgotten their why for working for that business. When you're on site and you've got the culture and you're feeling the heartbeat of it, it's subconsciously a constant reminder of why you're working for that business versus the bank down the road. But when you're remote, and if you don't engage, and as a leadership team, exactly what you're focusing on, if you don't do that, people are just forgetting their why. So they're wanting a career change for no other reason than they've lost their connection to the business. Exactly.
It's the connection. And what I learned in my career is, it's actually one of the things you should always look at when you're thinking about a role or a job or a company is who you're going to work with, because the people make it. Is your boss someone that you're going to learn from? It's like the saying, right? You should always play chess with people better than you, right? Are your team going to challenge you? And so that we've had to fight to maintain that, because, as you say, we're not interacting in the same way that we were before.
Yeah. Well, and well done, you guys, because, as I said, I think that for our STEM listeners, finding a business that actively puts their money where their mouth is, and they're following through with that, because words, as we know, lots of people talk about trying to build culture, but it's people like yourself that clearly are at your level, and it's top of your priority list. That shows that it's then going to resonate through your teams. It's a challenge when you join a business where it's a hot topic at the junior level, but the exec or the leadership, it's not on their agenda, and therefore it's almost impossible for it to be addressed. So yeah, I think you're pretty inspirational there. So wow, we're moving on to now the bit of the career advice, and you covered a really good bit about continuous learning earlier, and for people to be a bit more fearless in applications. But what other one or two bits of advice could you give our STEM listeners, our graduates, when thinking about getting that first foot in the door, I guess?
The first foot in the door, I think so when we're interviewing candidates, and it depends on the level, but there's a certain number of interviews that we do, right? And depending on the level, there might be 2, 3, 4, even 5 interviews. One of those is technical interview for a technology role. We are, and it's on equal footing with the other disciplines that we're recruiting for. We're looking for values. We're looking for things like integrity. We're looking for stewardship. We're looking for, will this person look at a broken window and want to fix it? Right? We're looking for drive. So we're looking for people that don't hold themselves back and perhaps inspire others around them. And we're looking for challenge. We're looking for people that point at the naked emperor, right, and say, that man has no clothes on, because that's what makes us better as a business. And then we might ask you some technology questions, because that stuff is all learned. And personally, what I hire for is passion, different ways of thinking, to balance out a team, to make sure that we've got people that are prepared to challenge each other and to be challenged. We're often looking for someone that does identify with our business. If I'm a Barclays customer and you're looking after my money, I want you to care about that. That needs to be a big deal for you, right? So we're also going to probably ask you questions about why Barclays. What is it that draws you to this company? And you should ask yourself that same question, because I think for me, it's not just the technology, it's the connection to the customer and the whole thing that all the way through. So if one of our, and I'm not going to get technical here, but if one of our computers break, we don't talk about it in terms of hours of downtime. We talk about it in terms of how many mortgage applications didn't go through.
Yeah.
How many people couldn't get money out of the ATM or pay their gas bill. And I tell you what, when the phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's what gets you out of bed to fix the problem every time. So I think we're really looking for the values, and we're looking for a bit of ambition and drive, and that willingness to challenge both the organization around you to make it better, but yourself as well. And we talked about continuous learning, creating opportunities for yourself, and growing yourself to then fill those opportunities. I think that's, we're looking for people that want to have a career with us.
Yeah, and thank you, because again, those things you look for, and although I totally understand they're part of you for Barclays, but actually their values, integrity, stewardship, drive, challenge, if that should be the underlying skill sets of any decent graduate. So when you're thinking about, and again, this is aimed at now our listeners, when you're thinking about how you can get that foot in the door, the advice Tom has just given, it has to be authentic. So you can't fake it. You can be seen straight away if you're trying to be something you're not. But you should be thinking around how you can evidence your values, integrity, and stewardship, drive, challenge, and as Tom said, specifically to him, passion, different ways of working, and identifying with the business is just really, really good principles to have. So thank you, because that really does resonate, I think. And what a brilliant way to start wrapping up the podcast, because I think, again, for many of our listeners, we're all incredibly empathetic how tough the market can be when you're trying to get a foot in the door, and those networks have been tough to sort of create or tap into, even at a graduate level, over the past year and a half, 2 years. So to be thinking out the box on how you can connect and create your own mini networks is just a really, really useful way of getting yourself sort of standing out, I guess. I think you probably agree with that, Tom.
Yeah. That's it. Every step in my career, what got me there isn't what gets me to the next step, right? So I think that it's the stuff that you do beyond the day job matters a lot, and I think at that STEM kind of graduate level, it's kind of, okay, well, what else did you do during your degree? What else are you doing now that makes you stand out, right? Because that's what we're looking for, I think, more than anything else. And you can create those stories that when you come to interview, you can tell, that will make someone like me go, yeah, that's what we want.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for being on the show. I hope you found it okay.
Enjoyed it. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And to all of our listeners, that's another Future Tech podcast episode. Thank you for either downloading or listening in. And as always, the podcast is on our landing page, arrowspodcast.com, and it's on the career pages of now 33 universities across the UK and the Netherlands, and expanding. So hopefully, if you found the podcast either through your career portal or on our landing page, hopefully the tips that we have given, and especially today's one, and again, as a final reminder, what's really stood out to me is the values, integrity, stewardship, drive, and challenge. If you can really think as Tom said, the technology questions, albeit it obviously has to be part of your skill set, but it's equally weighted against these other principles. That's something that hopefully you should really stand out and consider. So thank you for listening, everyone. Here's another episode of the podcast done, and on to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Future Tech with Charlie Sell, a podcast from Arrows Group Global. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you never miss an episode. Arrows Group is a global technology recruitment and workforce solutions provider who focus on people at the heart of all our interactions. With in-depth technology expertise and global candidate communities, we offer bespoke solutions to every client and candidate. To find out more, visit arrowsgroup.com.